Now, I know that this is going to be a shock to a lot of you, and I think it's something that I just need to say. I'm not cisgender. Whew. Glad to have that off my chest. So this video is going to be something quite a bit different. I'd been thinking for a little while about talking about the experience of coming out on YouTube, especially after having already built a bit of a platform before I did so. Except it's something that I've talked about before in various capacities, and I probably will talk about again. If anybody wants to ask me in detail, I can always answer those questions, but I kind of wanted to have a deeper look, a more extensive look, because, shock of shocks, trans people aren't a monolith. So whatever my experience was is not necessarily representative of what the experience of other people is. So I took a shot in the dark, reached out to nearly every trans creator I could think of who had started their channel prior to being out. I sent inquiries to some big names, expecting, honestly, for nobody to get back to me and for the entire project to just collapse under the weight of, nobody wants to do it. Well, that didn't happen. So you are going to be hearing from 4 different trans creators. James Stephanie Sterling of the Jimquisition, May Leitz of Nick's Fears, Exci of Exci, and Jessie Earl, aka Jessie Gender. Now, out of these 4, Jessie is slightly the odd one out because, though it is technically true she started her channel and began uploading videos prior to coming out, she wasn't public facing and the channel was pretty small by the time she did come out. But I still thought that she could lend a good perspective to the proceedings. So this will be the last you're going to hear from me until the very end of the video, other than to point one thing out. I'm also doing something a little extra with this one because I don't generally do this, but there is going to be a Patreon exclusive material here because this video, in its first assembly, was literally twice as long. So I'm going to be offering up to my Patreon supporters the full uncut videos for each of these 4 interviews. And those will be available to patrons at any tier. And if that sounds interesting to you and you're not already a patron, there's the thing. Hopefully something fun. I don't normally do videos that accommodate this kind of extra material, but that's enough stalling from me. Let's talk about coming out on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Jay. I make videos about media on any kind of media, really.
I'm James Stephanie Sterling, otherwise known as Jim Sterling. That's my work name, I guess. I am a video game industry critic.
My name is May Leitz. I'm a YouTuber focusing on horror movies and I guess kind of the macabre side of life.
I'm Jessie Gender. I'm a YouTuber that likes to use nerddoms, geekdoms, and mostly Star Trek because Star Trek is the best thing to talk about LGBTQ and specifically transgender issues, but also some social and political issues as well.
I produce videos primarily the Jimquisition, which airs on Mondays and takes something from the game industry and talks about it. Usually very critical because there's a lot of horrible stuff that goes on in the game industry. So I talk about industry abuse, I talk about monetization in the game industry, the way they overstep with that. But you're basically just having a pop.
When I say any kind of media, anything goes. It can be a real estate agent's tour of a house. That's the kind of broad definition we're talking about here.
My main thesis statement is I try to lead people into the worst darkness they can imagine and then walk them out of it so they know never to go there again.
And over time, I've introduced more and more anti-capitalist concepts into it.
To try and figure out how we use our media to understand our everyday lives and our everyday world.
And I tend to like to make fun of bad things while also reaching into the actual analytical side of what makes them bad.
Also, I choke slam people. So Those are the two main things I do, is videos about games and choke slamming people.
For me, I kind of understood that I was transgender, but I didn't really have that term yet when I was really, really young. As soon as I started to notice like there was differences between boys and girls, which was like happens when you're like in kindergarten, preschool, where you start to like really start to be separated out by like teachers and by parents and things like that. I started to like look at the girls and be like, oh, that's more kind of like what fits me. But I didn't really know how to articulate that. But I only knew that like to be that was considered wrong in some way.
I think right from the start of puberty, I knew that something was there, but I just never really even thought to try and comprehend what it was.
Well, I questioned it for years, just in ways I was unaware were explicitly questioning gender.
I was 7 years old and I asked my mom for Christmas. I said, Mom, I want Pokemon Crystal. And she said, okay. And then she got it for me for Christmas. And I opened it up and bada bing, there was Pokemon Crystal. And it was the reason I really, really wanted it because it was the first Pokemon game where you could actually play as a girl.
I also like remember some times where I would like tease other people to like play tag with me. And if I lost tag, this was in like preschool, whenever I would play tag with other people, if I lost the tag game, I would be like, oh, I have to wear a girl's dress.
Immediately decided to pick a girl because duh. And like the first name I came up with was May, and that's just stuck.
And so of course I would lose the game repeatedly. And then I would have to put on a dress in front of other people. And I would remember like I would put on the dress in the bathroom and just like really enjoy it, but then step out into the classroom, the daycare that I was in, and you feel the sense of laughter, and there became this sort of understanding that the person that I wanted to be was laughable.
Like there are moments now looking back where there were clues that go back as far as like 6 years old. Possibly before, I don't know, but that's the first time I really remember being confused for a girl because we were too poor to have haircuts. So I had fairly long hair and got confused for a girl once and really liked it. Like it felt correct, but I just buried it.
I didn't want to be seen as laughable. And so I tried to double down on being masculine and tried to be super, super masculine. So when I went into college, I really tried to be that way, but it didn't really work for me.
I watched a coming out video in 2019 and realized that the trans person coming out, who was Hannah Reloaded, I'll give her a wee shout out, I guess, watching her come out and realizing that she was just describing a lot of my feelings, just sort of kicked me into realizing what was going on.
Well, for me, it's come from a belief that there was a lot of physical gender crossing already there. I used to talk about having a hormonal imbalance because that was the only way I could describe the physical femme features I already had. And over time, realized it wasn't an imbalance, or certainly not in the femme direction. It was just a need to polish what was there, reducing things I didn't want.
I wasn't really the big, strong guy. I was much more like, I was compassionate. I was open. And that's not a bad thing for a man to be, but it always felt like I was failing at being a man. And that started to depress me more and more and more and more and more and more, especially in college, where because I wasn't at home anymore, I couldn't like wear women's clothing at any time. I had no outlet to share myself in any way.
The long and sordid bit of it is being 17 and realizing once again that you're trans, and then being 21 and once again realizing that you're trans, and then being 24 and once again realizing that you're trans.
But it wasn't until last year that I was able to start putting words to the feelings and felt bold enough to transition.
I just got so incredibly depressed. And there was this moment of like, I don't want to fulfill this function anymore. I don't want to play this role of being a guy anymore. And it was one of the darkest times of my life.
Because I live in the deep South, I live in Texas, and because I was raised by a mostly conservative family, I didn't really get a lot of opportunity to explore that aspect of myself until I was really out on my own.
And then since then, I've been confident that I'm trans, but also vaguely confused.
Luckily, this was also the same time, because I was in college, that was my first time to meet people beyond my initial, like I grew up in a small, the school that I went to was a small rural school. And so this college was the first time that I really got to meet like people who were openly LGBTQ. And I met two friends who were so like openly bisexual, openly like talking about sex and all this stuff. And it was really helpful for me. And I just sort of was like, if I don't tell anybody, I'm going to do something worse. And so I told them.
Once I got out on my own, I began to feel like this intense, like, I guess, like regret for all that lost time. But I've come to change my mind about that. And I'm mostly just very, very happy that I'm here.
I would talk to a very dear friend of mine, Phoenix, who was talking to me about clothing choices at one point. And when I do my training, I would wear women's clothes because they were more comfortable, they fit me better. And I thought that was it. But no, I didn't, because part of me was always enjoyed it and liked letting people know I enjoyed it. Not in a sexy way, just in a comfort way. This stuff fits me better. And part of me always wanted to express that to people and let them know.
So I'm more thankful to the brave soul that once existed in my body that was able to do that than I am critical of that person. I feel like that person saved my life.
I told them that I was trans, that I was a girl. And I remember the night that I did that, I told one of them for the first time, and it was 5 minutes of just like telling this deep secret of like, I am a girl. And they saw me and heard me. And then after that, we just talked about nerd shit after that. It was the nicest thing. It was like, oh, I get to be, I'm still me. They still see me. And gender really is just a part of that, but it's still me.
Talking to Fee, they said, you know what? I always picked up there wasn't something quite cis about you. And that hit me like a brick, because I had ingrained into my head so much that cis is what I was, and I couldn't change that. So that switched a light on, and then it was kind of a snowball effect.
My coming out was not super great. My family didn't appreciate it at all. And I lost housing. It was a big pain in the butt.
I generally tend to be an open book anyway. I don't really have many impulses to keep things secret unless they're other people's private stuff that I have no right to be sharing.
As I say though, once the door was open, it all just poured out. And that's, why I've so quickly embraced it over the course of this year.
But the thing that I've always held on to is like, it's always just me. And this is just a piece of who I am.
At the end of the day, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad that I figured out how to stand on my own 2 feet. And that's kind of been my most valuable asset going into the remainder of my life, is just that ability to stand on my own 2 feet. And I feel like had I not had it as hard as I did coming up, I probably wouldn't be quite as like independent as I am now. So I'm somewhat thankful for my upbringing, but at the same time, it was awful.
So I didn't really ever feel that being trans was a secret, but it did feel like a big deal to share, and it did take me a while to say it out loud.
It was unplanned. It was not something I was necessarily building to. I knew it would have to happen one day, but I was planning far later down the line. I was like, at least wait till I get my new hat, which is finally on its way to me. It took a year to get finished, but it's a very good hat. But I couldn't wait that long.
The time that I started talking about trans issues on the channel and started talking about trans issues publicly was sort of two moments in my life. One, where I was just in the sort of beginning phases of transition. Like I've been out for about a year or two, been on hormones for a year or two. I had just had gender confirmation surgery, the vaginoplasty. And so there was all this new information and stuff that I was processing and learning and trying to work through. So I was like, oh, gender is a social construct. What does that mean? Oh, like, what does it feel like to have a new vagina at 20 years old? What it's like to go through a new puberty at 20 years old? Like this whole slew of experiences.
When I came out, it was a very different world. It was like right off the coattails of like Gamergate and stuff like that. There was a big push against trans people. There was a big push against like women's rights, leftism in general, stuff like that.
And I think the main things holding me back were the idea that once I've said it, I will always have said it. So in this time that I wasn't really sure, and this time that I didn't really know what was going on, and I was still very confused.
I'd been softly building to it on places like Instagram, where I show off a little more. And before the video was published, it seemed like some transphobes had worked out what was going to happen, and started pre-abusing me, pre-harassing.
It was still committing to something, even if I was committing to just being public about being confused, which is why it took me much longer than, it could have to come out.
But what changed with the video, with coming out, was the night before I'd gone out for the first time fully presenting. And it was the very first time in my life that I felt like I didn't need to apologize for existing and being seen.
I was terrified to come out online because I knew for a fact that a lot of the audience really didn't want that to be my future. Like they wanted me to stay doing exactly what I was doing and never ever change.
It was the first time in my life that I didn't mind being noticed. And it was the first time in my life I could actually just sit there, dining outside, of course, be responsible. And I just didn't feel afraid to be.
I think a lot of people saw themselves in me and they wanted me to remain consistent so that they themselves didn't have to change.
And feeling that way, the next morning when it came time to film for the Gymquisition, I couldn't go back. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't put on the man costume anymore.
I sort of used YouTube to be this place to articulate some of the things that I was feeling, to process them, to put them out in hopefully an educational way.
So I just went ahead and did it, and it was scary. I had nerves.
ContraPoints came out like 2 months before this, and she did this big elaborate video with all of these theatrics about, why she was coming out, how she felt, and what she was initially going to, be doing. And so it kind of laid this sort of roadmap for a lot of people. And I didn't want to do that.
And I spoke to Laura Kate Dale, who said, look, that's what they want. They want you to feel too afraid to come out. That once you've done it, you've beaten them.
I was so nervous about it that I just quickly threw an outfit together, quickly threw all the stuff together, didn't even use like an external microphone, didn't light the video very well. Like I barely put any effort into it at all because I was so scared.
So I just hit publish and let the chips fall where they may. But yeah, it wasn't planned, and I didn't make a big deal out of it. There was no press blast. There was no dedicated video. And that feels on theme for me, to just to just be there and say, hey, here I am. Here's a thing I'm doing. Here's me.
So I've never made a coming out video or anything. I've just sort of instead stopped hiding anything.
While no one seemed to be expecting a full femme appearance, I had come out as non-binary. I had mentioned in one, I think 2 videos last year that I was on HRT and was experimenting with the lipstick.
It's 3 a.m. when it published. It blew up immediately. The video was called The Truth because I made a joke in the video where I was like, I'm now realizing that as a YouTuber, I am withholding a big secret and I could potentially use that for financial gain.
The lipstick wasn't so shocking to people because I've always been very colorful in my presentation, let's say. I always wore an outfit, a costume. So that being part of it wasn't that shocking.
As I was, even before I came out, I think every video on my channel for a while included at least one trans joke, as in I am trans joke, but very few people noticed or cared.
For the most part, my approach was just trying to be straightforward about it and just trying to be like, hey, here's my struggle. Here's what I've been dealing with my entire life. Here's how I'm going to deal with it. And like, I understand that might not be something that you're cool with. And if it isn't, might I suggest you find someone else?
So like, the film Mulan, which is a, trans icon film, there were just a lot of natural places to make trans jokes in that video. And I think one of them made it into the final edit. And very few people got what I was referencing, but I think some people did.
Anybody who ever has a public platform or has some level of fame and then comes out is going to deal with those institutions, like, people who want to write about and intellectualize your choices.
Once I feel that I have decided on my final name, my final pronouns and everything like that, I do intend to make a video just explaining to people what's going on. And I fully intend to call that video, Whoops, I Transed My Gender.
I thought that the struggle with YouTube was going to be I was going to get harassed off the website. But it turns out it wasn't that as much as it was people supporting me, encouraging me not to be like too leftist about it, which is kind of absurd.
It wasn't until really all I did was add a wig to it. And that, yeah, people took notice of that.
So after coming out, I blew up online, but that basically means that a whole bunch of new people, instead of seeing new content from the newly out trans person, just went back and watched all of my prior stuff, and that scrutiny became kind of overwhelming.
I've never been shy about sharing photos of myself or images of myself pre-transition. I actually don't mind sharing that sort of stuff.
I frequently get comments on videos older than The Truth about how those were the before times, before I lost my mind and decided to become this monster. So it just got to a point where I was like, every day that passes that I read another thing like that, or I see another thing like that on something that's older than where I'm at now, it feels like people clinging to a non-committal existence. Like they're clinging to something that isn't there. And I have a duty, I feel like, to break them of that spell.
I totally understand other trans people's sort of hesitance to be like, oh, stuff before I transition that doesn't feel like me. It doesn't represent me at this time. It feels like a different life. It feels like there's this hard cutoff. I totally get that. Totally makes sense to me.
And then I just deleted all my videos. And I did delete them. They are gone.
I mean, there are some that I took down that were mostly like, I used to, when I was really young, I used to do like music video stuff.
It honestly wasn't that difficult of a decision.
Like my first ever video on my channel is a Doctor Who and Rose shipping video. If I could turn back time. That's the first video. I forget the name of the song.
I don't care about anything that I've ever made just generally in my life.
So I took down that stuff just when I changed the direction of the channel.
I am the kind of person where I treat art as kind of like a bowel movement. I know that's crude. I'm sorry that's crude, but it's true. Art is kind of a bowel movement. So you just kind of grab something that you're feeling, you push it out there, and then you're like, all right, see you later, bud. And you let it flush away.
If I want to be an educator about transitions, this isn't the only way you can do that. But for me, the way I like to do that is just to humanize being trans, because I feel like in many ways, many people don't see being trans as a normal part of the human experience. And I think being trans is just as normal as any other part of the human experience. And so I think part of what we show that is just sort of saying like, hey, look, I had a journey through life, just as like someone may have a journey with their weight or with their, with their job or with their any other thing in their life. My journey was with gender. And so that's how you can relate in that way.
The written responses were mostly positive. On social media, people were excited for me, very complimentary.
Mostly very positive. There were the main kind of difficult reaction that I found was the what a lot of people refer to as concern trolls, and I don't think that a lot of them consider themselves to be trolls.
I got a lot of questions, especially once it was a few weeks in and people realized that I was not changing back.
People won't assume that you're not taking good care of yourself and then tell you to. And either their ideas of what taking care of yourself means are flawed from my perspective, or they're things I've already done. And I don't need you to tell me that, Stephen. Someone on Tumblr went, but wow, so we've just got to accept your word as best. And I'm like, yes, yes, you do. Sorry. I'm the main authority on this. That's how that works.
Day and date was when I started losing subscribers en masse. It was 2,000 that day, and every Monday since has been let's say the other way around, 1 to 2,000. I came out, and then the subs went woof.
The analytics were really good for about a month, and then tanked pretty hard.
I don't know why they draw the line at me being happy and they didn't at Podfucker or any of the other grotesqueries that I have played over the years.
I guess the reason that there was a downturn was pretty much settling in is very different than the reaction of a surprise. Like if you're surprised by something, you're like, wow, I want to know about this, even if you don't like it. But settling into something, especially change, is really difficult.
I don't mind it so much that so many people are departing, because the audience that's been left is so overwhelmingly queer or queer inclusive. One of the most telling things to me was the first full audience wrestling show I did after lockdown. There was an entire section that I just called the Sterling section that were there to see me. And I'm not sure if there was a cis person among them.
But I've had a whole bunch of those people come back now and say, I unsubscribed to you then because, your video hit too close to home. I wasn't ready for that information. Like I was transgender, but I couldn't tell people and I didn't know how to handle it. There was like jealousy elements or things like that. So there were all these like conflicting elements at play in both how well the video did and how kind of scattered the reaction was.
I would get sort of two different reactions. I would get nerdy people coming in and being like, oh, I love your nerd stuff. I love your take on Star Trek. I love your takes on, these different properties or whatever. And I didn't know that you were trans. And I love that you sort of add that perspective.
I feel like I'm finding my people more and more, even as I'm losing the capital G gamers more and more.
The second one at the time was more trans folks or more LGBTQ folks. They were sort of more people being like, oh, I see you're trans, you're talking about these issues, but you're also a nerd. You're also a dork. And that's how I've always seen myself.
The hardcore gamers, the stereotypical ones, and there's a lot of them, are notorious for being angry at the slightest bit of inclusion. And that's been borne out among a large chunk of my previous audience. And they are now departing, and I am now famous for attacking gamers. That's the new thing I'm known for. I hate all gamers now is the common belief.
More trans people have found me because I think there's just a circle of, this person is trans. I'm trans. I'll have a look. And that's as deep as it goes. And then they arrive.
I got a lot of questions about whether this was a joke or serious. Part of that is because I've been known in the past for outlandish costumes and dressing up. This was not one of those times. It was not an outlandish costume change, and it was certainly not a joke. Taking estrogen for a goof is quite a level of commitment.
What I like to typically try to frame myself and think about myself as being the trans person in the nerdy space, being like, I'm a huge nerd, I'm a huge geek, I'm a huge dork. Let's talk about Star Trek. Let's talk about Doctor Who. Let's talk about Stargate. Let's talk about whatever the hell, Star Wars. And then let me add my perspective as a trans person into it when it's relevant or when I think it has something interesting to say, but otherwise just sort of add my own thoughts into it.
Right at the beginning, you're going to get a lot of, hey, cool, good for you. And then you're slowly over the course of time going to steadily lose a lot of those people.
You know, there's also, of course, the occasional transphobic hate comment, which I get more on Twitter than on YouTube.
Whenever I've talked about trans issues on my channel, they always got the most dislikes, the most pushback, the most insults in comments.
There's always like the TERFs and the transphobes who are, you know, they'll come back out and say like, oh, you'll never be a woman. Oh, you'll never be a da-da-da-da-da.
For the most part, I brush it off. It does get under the skin a bit. But for the most part, you know, it's not too bad, but I don't like it.
But those are typically pretty easy to ignore because they say the same 5 things over and over and over and over again repeatedly. And so it's sort of like, all right, you got your stock phrases and that's about it.
There was one video in particular of a game called, I don't really want to use the name, but it was T/Slur Gladiator. And the video I did on that was massively disliked, and to the point where people were gloating about how it was bombing. People were furious that I censored its name in the headline, absolutely furious. And they were furious that I spoke up about it.
The transphobic comments that appear on my channel generally appear more about like characters and stuff I'm reviewing than they do about me. Because I think people who are transphobic don't really stick around for long enough to realize that's what's going on with me.
Anytime in a review where I'd mention in one sentence in an entire review something questionable about trans presentation in the game, people would single it out and get angry that I dare talk about it.
And like, I don't, you know, blame anyone for looking at me, a pre-transition person, and assuming man. I don't think we're at a place culturally where we can call that unreasonable. I think that's how people are raised, and I don't really want to get into that discussion, I guess.
Ever since coming out, I've been too angry, too political, according to some people. A lot of people have said, oh, you criticize capitalism too much now, when I've been explicitly calling out capitalism in my work since 2019 and implicitly calling it out before then.
When they assume that and they see that I'm wearing like nail polish or whatever, and they're like, men shouldn't wear nail polish. I don't consider that kind of comment transphobic, so I wasn't really including it. I consider that more to just be a different kind of stupid tipshittery.
I think the world changed The world changed more than I did.
I wanted to show that I was fundamentally the same person. So I'm glad there was no real content change. There's been a perception change of the content.
I think that I probably would have been more successful had I not come out. And the trajectory that I was on was a lot better than the trajectory that I'm on now, like financially, subscriber wise, things like that.
I've spoken to some fans who said they think I'm different now. And after discussing it with them, they realized that it was just their perception, that they saw me differently because I express myself differently physically.
The world that I was in back then was definitely more of like a straight cishet guy world. And that's what people wanted.
But when it comes to my work, I'm expressing myself the same way I always have. I've not changed.
I feel like the world now is more open to rewarding me for being myself over lying to them. I think people would rather me be who I am than who I was nowadays. Whereas back then, I think they probably would have preferred me to stay the same.
I think it's important to show that I've not changed, that I am not too angry or too political. I'm just me.
I think I made very much the right decision by just accepting that the world was changing and that meant I needed to be more honest with myself.
I think maybe the only thing I'd have changed would have been if I knew where I would eventually land on the subject. In my coming out tweet that I did, which is always a good thing to make a big life announcement, is to do a tweet.
I think it was a quintessentially me way to do it. I looked, the first overtly public tweet was just a big meme. It was just, I screenshotted several things that were very trans, these like 4 screenshots with the caption,
I mentioned that I was happy with any and all pronouns, which was cited many times as a reason to not use they and them, even after I had done some, introspection and realized that I felt the most comfortable with that. And I certainly wasn't comfortable with he and him. But people kept referring to that tweet to still use he and him. So my coming out tweet has actually been deleted because I just don't want people to refer to it. Some people innocently, others just looking for an excuse.
And that was my first like overt trans thing that I like said, yeah, there's something going on here.
Honestly, I think the only thing that I would change would be just to be more outspoken about it earlier.
I'm glad that I just kept it casual, that I never made a big deal of it, that I could just carry on being me.
That was the first time I sort of admitted that publicly. Admitted isn't the right word, I don't think, but you know what I mean.
The other thing too, though, that I will say that just the general perspective of being a trans person has just colored a lot of how I view everything nowadays.
And I think a big aspect of bad analysis is egoist analysis. It's asking yourself, okay, well, who am I in relation to this work? And what do I want this work to be so that it lines up with who I am and not necessarily like the truth of the world.
You just sort of accepted the way that things are, that things that like, oh, this is the way gender is supposed to be. This is the way that you're supposed to have your life. This is the way that, these media properties were made and are supposed to be consumed, and they've always been this way. This is the type of representation, the way representation should be.
So transitioning for me was largely like accepting the truth of the whole world, not just myself. And because of that, I had to handle my work completely differently.
Being trans, now that you sort of are forced to see the structures of society for the, made up things that they are, you start to understand that in all things, in media, in in your analysis of things. And so I think that there's been an interesting perspective shift.
And so I look at it obviously with more of a queer lens nowadays, but like I feel like I can see through a lot of character psychology in my analysis nowadays that I couldn't before, because I'm more freed up to see people's minds as these like not necessarily like a standing point things, but they're ever in flux and they're ever changing, and you see people as like these consciousnesses instead of just a body. It's accepting that everybody is kind of like you, and if you do that, it's like this ultra empathy that you feel.
I still love Star Trek, but I also understand Star Trek is a thing made up of, mostly cisgender straight white dudes. And they had a certain perspective on that. And they succeeded in many ways because a lot of them were more empathetic than most, but they also failed in a lot of ways. And that sort of informed my understanding of it. And so it's like, I can still love this thing, but I also am more able to critique it than I think I would have been had I not gone through this journey as a trans person.
I look at work now, I'm a lot keener at understanding like the people at play and why they're making their psychological decisions, over like looking at things and asking them, well, how similar is this to my life?
I'm more openly gender non-conforming on camera, and I make more trans jokes.
I think my work will remain largely the same.
I don't know that it's really changed much more than that.
Because I'm still the same person, I have the same beliefs.
I don't know what the impact of my life would have been had I not done exactly everything that I did.
In terms of coming out and things like that, no. I mean, I think I'm fairly pleased with the way things have gone.
I think the only change people have noticed that I certainly agree with is that I'm just happier and more energetic and more than I have been in previous years.
I can embrace adaptation, embrace change, realize that you might be a different person tomorrow than you are today.
Because I was miserable in previous years. When my videos were at the height of their popularity, I wasn't there for it.
Don't do the thing that capitalism tells you to do. Do not just make the same thing over and over and over. Don't be the same person over and over and over.
But now I can't and wouldn't want to hide how happy I am with who I am.
And there you go. I hope that people found this insightful. That was my goal with this one. And of course, I have to give one more thanks to Stephanie, May, Jay, and Jessie for giving me their time, their honesty, and being open about these things. It's not always easy to talk about, but they were very generous. And I hope that if you weren't familiar with some of these creators, that you'll check out their work, because I've been a fan of all three for a while. So whatever thoughts you might have, comments, not personal attacks. I really shouldn't have to say that one at this point. But go ahead and leave your thoughts down in the comment section and we'll talk about it. Like, share, subscribe, help me as well, but no pressure on that. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.
I just realized I never asked you if I can curse. I'm so sorry.
Curse away. I will probably bleep it.
Thank fuck.
Understand that, but go ahead.
That's fine with me. You can bleep me. Anyway,